One.
Well, this is the last session in Audi 3 for TIE Global Summit 2020. The topic that we're discussing is harnessing the untapped potential of EdTech. Now, EdTech has the power to enhance efficient learning process, improve access to educational tools, and empower both educators and learners. This potential opens up opportunities for innovators, investors, and resource providers to scale sustainably across the world. Join us to know more from the champions of EdTech. I have Mohit Jain right here, who will be moderating this event. He is the CEO of Makers.com. He has 4 global patents in artificial intelligence. Over to you, Mohit.
Thank you. So I'm joined in this panel by two extremely well-known gentlemen. One is Daniel Dippold, and the second is Amit Agrawal. Daniel, some time back, was marked out as a top talent under 25 in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. He's a TED speaker and also carries the title of Global Shaper by the World Economic Forum. He's currently the founder of eWard, an award-winning edtech startup which creates education software and the world's only education-driven entrepreneurship scholarship program. In an earlier avatar, Daniel built Kairos Europe to an organization spanning more than 1,000 community members, represented in over 30 countries, and supported by John Tallon of Skype fame and the ex-president of the United States, Bill Clinton. He's passionate about machine learning, the possibilities in EdTech through new forms of tech-powered education, in Parker, philosophy, and board games. Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the panel discussion.
Hi, good to be here.
I'll just take a few minutes and then introduce our other panelist. He's Mr. Amit Agrawal. Amit helped bring YouTube to India and grew the business from scratch to touch $100 million per annum. With his startup, Okie Pokie, he aims to make edutainment popular in India. Amit is also the co-founder of WizKids Media and India Goes Global. Would you like to say something more about yourself, or can we jump into the discussion?
Let's go right in.
Okay.
Yeah, same here.
That's great. So the first thing I thought we'll talk about is, education is supposed to have multiple purposes or multiple jobs to be performed. It could be an economic objective, a social objective, a political objective, or a cultural objective. But what, in your opinion, is the primary job of education?
I'm happy to start with that one. To me, the primary job of education is to do literally anything that gets us to get a task done or to get the task done more efficiently, right? And by saying anything, I really mean it could be anything. Sometimes that is a skill set you need. Sometimes that is actually pure knowledge. You just need to know X. And once you know X, you can get the task done, right? And it's pretty broad what this anything could be. And I think that's also why we're seeing so many different forms of education, going from learning on the job to learning during university. And a last note on this potentially is I think they're getting so intertwined and blurred into each other currently that things aren't really happening in the most efficient way. And that's where I think a lot of innovation potential still is.
Amit?
Sure. So we briefly spoke about this earlier, and I eat, breathe, sleep, education for last so many years, and according to me, I think not very different, but a slight different emphasis, because contextually, I'll maybe speak about more India here. If you look at the middle class of India, education typically means that is this my ticket to go to the next orbit as a family. And the broad thinking is that even if one child gets educated properly, right, that means the family will go to the next plane. And therefore, it's a tool which empowers a student, a child, a life, a family to be able to utilize their potential better and therefore progress. Um, so same thing, but said very differently from an impact perspective of what it means from a user lens.
So would you be saying that the primary job of education is economic in nature and not really to form our social, cultural, or political stances? So we're not saying that it's not any of these, but what is the primary job?
Sure. I think that's a great way to ask that question, but largely you're going to segment this out, right? One answer will not apply to entire India or entire planet. So if you go to an SECA, you're talking about something else. You're talking about a middle class, which is where I started by saying what I did earlier. They look at it very differently. Education is an enabler for not just economic, but also social progress, right? Uh, your social standing is driven, and you go around like in Bangalore and you see so many nameplates where people have suffixed their name with their degrees. And I'm just saying that as a social status also. So it means many things to other people, but functionally it's what Daniel said, right? But impact wise, it's similar to what I said for, let's say, middle class. And impact could be financial. For somebody else, it could be financial and social, or only social. For some, it could be just equipping them to go to a certain path that they've decided for themselves in life. And because it's a broad question, I think age group wise, the answers will vary a lot. I deal mostly with young children, kids below 10 years, right, for last so many years. Their answers are very different for education. But when you talk to adults or kids at, who are graduating out of an engineering college, their answers to education is very different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. The only, kind of follow-up question on that is, if the objectives of the education system are very broad-based, then how well are our traditional education systems or institutions doing? So are they doing a good job at all of these things? Are they not doing a good job in any one of these areas? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm happy to start again. I think, it's really difficult. What is a good job? I think they're doing a decent job, but I think they could be doing a way better job, especially when you look to practical subjects these days, right? If you see how things are being taught this way, it makes sense to look a little bit back into the past. The first ever university, the Platonic Academy, was basically just a system where people went in, right, and then they were solving problems and they were discussing together. And then during the Middle Ages, we kind of moved to a teacher-centered learning where there was one lecture, a set of knowledge just being transferred to people, and that really helped us scale the entire educational thing. And in my opinion, that was great because you want a broadly educated population, you want to scale. But then one thing happened, which is YouTube. To me, we're going to go into that later on, right? YouTube is one of the greatest edtech ventures in a sense in the world, because anything is on YouTube these days, educational content as well. And I can just watch a video from Three Blue, One Brown about neural nets, and it will prepare me more for the subject than some MIT lecture I've watched, right? And I think this is an incredible phenomenon, which means that tech is now scaling education massively. And that means that educational institutions, they're not necessarily having to do that anymore. They're not necessarily having to do all that teacher-centered learning, but they're still doing this, right? And when I was at university, I got a set of lectures where I just listened. And then I memorized some slides, and then I did some exams based on this. And that, in my opinion, is not really how education should look like. I think this is really not difficult at all. It just measures, how good I am in memorizing things. What would be possible with great professors at a university is to solve problems together and to enter into a dialogue with them. And that wasn't always possible for me, or at least you could have done this to a great extent, because I can now watch everything at home. We call this flipped learning or blended learning, right? And there's a whole body of research saying, why don't we flip the model where the lecture is actually at home? We listen to whatever we want to learn, and then we discuss it together. And that moment of convergence, educational convergence, happens in the classroom. And that's, I think, what educational institutions should actually do. But I see that really rarely these days. And I think, this educational institutions could be so much more tech enabled. There could be so much more just moved out of the university, and other things done at university where you actually need access to world-class professors.
Yes. The reason I was particularly asking this question also was, we are seeing somewhere, a large monolithic structure like the education institution, whether it be a school or a college or university, being kind of broken up, and new companies taking birth with highly specific offerings. So somebody wants to teach English. Yes, Amit? Somebody wants to teach digital devices. Somebody wants to teach artificial intelligence. Somebody else wants to teach machine learning. So are you seeing this? So are you seeing somewhere that this huge, large, integrated giant is being attacked by these small Goliaths everywhere?
Is that addressed to me or to Amit?
Both of you.
This time, Amit, please go first.
Okay.
Sure. I think definitely. So there are two things broadly, and I'll sort of cover one of my points in the previous question here. I think the massive changes coming from two axes, right? One is technology, the way technology is taking over, enabling so many more experiences than ever before, right? With the computing power going up, the algorithmic power going up, there's so much more of cloud innovation that's allowed, allowing innovation at scale, even with like small workforce. And that's what startups are good at, small startups are good at. Other is, like you said, monolithic structures. I think Daniel made a point. They were probably good in an era where information consumption wasn't that rapid, where information evolution of information that you needed as a knowledge to go to the next level wasn't at the same pace. And I don't know if I visualize like 10 years out. In India, I grew up in where if you're a science student, you're like probably the smarter of the lot. Otherwise, you've not arrived yet. And I'm like, there's so much more to arts that we missed out in that process. But besides that, within that, will my subjects be physics, chemistry, maths, or biology? And then they added computer science? Or will you just start breaking them out into 50 different types of sciences, etc., at a much earlier stage? And I don't know whether we'll have time to discuss the NEP over here. I think they've tried to do some very good things. I would say better late than never and not enough, but definitely very positive. So coming back, so one is technology, one is the lacuna in the current system, which is enabling a lot of this innovation to come out. And I just like the phrase small Goliaths. I don't know whether you purposefully coined it, but yeah, I mean that's the massive opportunity in front of us, that now you can leverage the hardware innovation, the way the coding standards have become, the way the computing power has become, the way the cloud ecosystem is evolving to enable you. And you can just go build out one small thing and scale. I mean, look at QMath's story, right? It's a pedagogy innovation being done at scale, no questions asked, right? For a critical skill, one of the 3 R's. We launched something simple in English, and we just took off, like millions and millions of words being learned on their own. And now we're moving towards a truly blended learning model, which is so I've been speaking about flipped learning, and I want to challenge Daniel on that, because as much as I love the model, I'm sure Daniel also does, but the problem is, are our teachers equipped to handle a flipped classroom? Because when the theory is happening or the knowledge part is happening passively at home, what does the classroom therefore become? Most of the teachers are really scared of that, and which is the only reason this is such fantastic technology innovation, which could have impacted pedagogy at scale, has not taken off. Um, but now we're trying to do a truly blended experience in our vertical for little children, where we're bringing in a live teaching with a very different lens of enabling through activity lens, something that I would like to see in more classrooms. So the future of classroom is also going to change. Just like I said, will you teach 50 different science subjects and just crash them into physics, chemistry, maths, biology? I think it's hard to be designing education policy anymore with the pace at which this is evolving. But yes, What is going to happen is smaller players will suddenly start to boom. 5 years ago, when Vedantu was launching live classes, people thought they had no hope in India. Daniel, some of these names might be new to you. My apologies. More Indian examples here than not. I'm sure you'll bring in European names to my vocabulary. They're a live class leader, market leader in India. Big fan of their work. But 5 years ago, there was no geo when they did it. It's just true to their vision, uh, predicting when the technology will enable, the bandwidth will enable such an experience. And look at how they've taken off. And there are many more. I mean, I'm just picking out few names, but there's lots happening here. And I'm so excited at what's happening and what's about to unleash. Because I don't know whether we'll have time to talk about the COVID impact on Edtech suddenly. But that's been a big changer for countries like India.
Yeah, I think it has been everywhere in the world. And I couldn't agree more with your points, Ahmed. I just want to build up on them. The first one I found really interesting is, I think never ever in the history have learners been as empowered as they're today. They have access to resources. They can build stuff, right? They can build with Amazon or DigitalOcean. They can put their own machines online and just do some crazy ass machine learning. Wouldn't be imaginable before, right? So people can now do this and they can experiment around, and I think that really changes the model. And if you look at some of the global players, also Coursera, Edtech, and so on, I think what they're demonstrating us to us is that you can literally just scale education very easily, and people from all over the world can do tiny packets of knowledge and learn skills based on that. I think though one of their biggest issues is they're going in the wrong direction by building fully fledged degrees, which is again sacrificing flexibility. It's exactly going in the opposite direction. You want flexibility. And the second thing is they are all, at least the courses I know, I've done heaps of Coursera courses. I love Coursera. But they're always very superficial, right? So once I've done one course on, let's say, R, I can go into advanced data science, but at one point it's just going to be like I've done everything, and then there's probably 10 to 15 other courses on R. I don't know which ones overlap, and it gets really difficult to just get a little bit more specialized. And I think now moving into the future, what will be possible at one point is that you might start with the sciences, right? Or you might start as a business student, you're very interested in finance, and then you discover you're very interested in math because that's what excites you about finance, and that gets you into data science, and you start programming. And educational degrees should be able to just provide you with more of what you really enjoy, what you really like. And at one point, you do all these courses. You might have started with business, but then you move into these areas of the sciences, and you end up getting a degree in applied business mathematics or something like that, which is a blend, a unique thing only you as a human being have studied, right? This is also partly of what we do at eWar. We have a learning map where there's just no curriculum. You can go literally from anywhere to anywhere. You go from the top left corner to the bottom right. You go inside out, outside in. Whatever you want, you choose. And what we've really noticed is that learners are really good at prioritizing. They know where they want to go. And as you go further down the road, you discover also what you really want. You can't possibly know what you truly want at the beginning of your career. When I went to university, I had a very different picture of the world. I started studying something, and then through learning knowledge, I was aware of new things. And based on those new things, I wanted to study new things. But university didn't really allow me to do that because I had my fixed degree, and I would have probably moved into a little bit of a different direction. And I think tech will enable us to do this in the future. And that's, I think, where institutions, where current players should go into by making that flexibility possible rather than inhibiting that flexibility.
Okay. So both of you touched on the pandemic, which is currently raging all over the world, and its impact on education, and what is likely to be there tomorrow Will the current trend sustain or will it give way to something else? So, what are your thoughts on what has the pandemic done as far as the edtech industry is concerned?
Daniel, you're going next.
Yes, Amit.
Okay, happy to do that. I think yes, it's drastically accelerated digitization because we're now doing things from home. I think if you look at Coursera, they have these campuses, right? Coursera campuses, I think. Um, Less than 100 in 2019, and then COVID came, and I think they've rolled out multiple thousands within a couple of months, right? And I think that's the magic we're seeing. People are suddenly open to new things, and if you look at the educational landscape, it's incredibly conservative, and I really think fear and conservatism is holding a lot of universities back from doing a lot of great things they could possibly do because they're worrying about their roles, worrying about their jobs, and so on. And COVID just drastically changed it because people had to go with all that digitization. And will that prevail? I really think so because the big trend we're seeing is that we're getting more and more sophisticated in our judgment. If I'm talking to my grandma, for instance, and fortunately she doesn't speak English, so wouldn't really listen to me now in that conversation. But she thinks I'm really stupid for not doing a PhD in Cambridge because in her world, there's a certain rule for everything, and it's all in different buckets, and a PhD is just better than everything else. And I think that has been a lot of our decision making 50, 60 years back. We just had our buckets, and based on those buckets, we categorized people and we made sense of the world. And now you don't make fun of an overweight person because it might be their genetics, it might be a certain genetic predisposition, and you understand things on a more granular level. And I think the same thing will happen to education. You will not judge a person just because they went to Harvard, just because they went to Cambridge. We still, brands are going to remain. I'm 100% sure. And this will not completely turn upside down in the next 10 years. But I think it will happen less and less. And we will be more open to look into the big picture. And if we actually are able to certify what people do online, to like all the YouTube videos they've watched, all the problems they've solved on Stack Overflow, on GitHub, what like making sense of all of this, we will have a way better picture of what people can actually do. And that will tell us way more about that person than them having gone to Harvard. So will this trend continue? Yes, I think so. I think we will get more and more empowered to do these kind of segmented or split up educational degrees, micro education, if you will, and people will accept this more and more and more. And I think that there might be some, like after COVID, it might go a little bit back to normal, but the big trend is not going to change. The big trend will be that we will move into that flexible landscape of literally being able to do anything, as I described earlier, and seeing education more like a web of knowledge with many directions, many of which you need to learn later on, because there's a thing called unknown unknowns, right? You don't know what you don't know, and you need to discover your unknown unknowns throughout the process. And I think that's where education will go, and it will allow way more flexibility. And it's really up to universities right now to decide whether they want to play a role in that and whether they want to open up and make this possible or not.
Very interesting. Very
Sure.
interesting.
So I have a point over there, Mohit, if that's okay.
Yeah,
So
please.
let's just zoom out a little bit on what COVID is actually doing. On one end, more and more masses are experiencing internet in many ways, including educational content. But I want you to look at in the economic reality of this. The traditional school system is struggling since COVID started and probably going into the next academic session for just admissions. All right. So there's a lot of pressure that's building up over there because that will promote like seriously harsh measures across the ecosystem everywhere. Similarly, at the outside, the unemployment rate is rising because the economy will take some time to get back. And therefore, all the schools, all the colleges where your output was your campus placements and other things like that, that's also struggling, right? Because of the way the economy is. Now, it's going to get harder. Now, when it gets harder, people are going to come back to say, am I more prepared? So my personal forecast is in the next 2 to 3 years, the world is going to see at least 100 new edtech unicorns. All right. Now, I don't know which part of the world they'll come from. My bet is 50 of them will probably come from India. All right. Because we're good at so many things. We're good at tapping multicultural, multilingual needs, broad middle class, which is going to struggle more because it's not the Harvard that'll struggle. It's not the IIM Bangalore that'll struggle, right? It's not the IIM Ahmedabad that'll struggle. It's not the top IITs that'll struggle. But there's a huge world below that. We're talking about literally thousands of colleges struggling to place their students, right? And it's an economic crisis creating a ripple of sorts. Now, EdTech is going to unleash these micro courses, will going to unleash opportunities for people. Okay, can you get plugged into something while you're doing it? And it's happening already to the current batch of graduates. It will happen again the next batch of graduates. And I'm hoping after that it'll start becoming more normal that we're used to. But you know what? Normal is never back what was the old way of doing things. This is the new normal because what will happen is this educational products will enable a lot more youth to go out and try different parallel careers more aggressively than before because now it's like thrust upon them. Sometimes you just are forced to take radical measures. Okay, fine, I grew up to maybe find a job in an MNC or whatever industry that I was passionate about, but now they're not hiring as a block. So what do I do? Okay, do I want to become a singer and make my living? How do I use internet to do that? There's going to be learning courses around that, tools around that. And same thing at the entry level. If a parent is scared because I don't want to send my child in a social situation like a classroom, right? No matter what, then how do you homeschool them? So homeschooling, home tuition will just take off, right? Now it's a very tiny base. It's still very scary as a parent that I talk to that I will take my pull my kids off the school. But we also, as Okipoki, we operate in the after school space. A lot of edtechs operate in the after school space. That is definitely seeing a massive boom time. So if you're a entrepreneur, if you're just started out in edtech, just make sure. I love the phrase. Sorry, Mohit, I'm going to pick on you again. Small Goliaths. Trust me, this is your time. If you're launching something which is good, just do a good job of one skill. And the world is so hungry right now, it's never been hungry before. And that's what COVID means to you. So if you're not encashing this, even if you're solving like one small, tiny skill, there are millions of users out there who are really scared for their kids' futures, for their own futures. Who are going to just grab you because they need that solution right now more than ever before. And it's our duty and responsibility to come up and shine at this time.
So what I hear both of you saying is the importance of microlearning and how this is being enabled by technologies, in particular the internet. I also hear you saying that this is likely to be supplemental to the current education system, which is followed in schools and colleges and universities, though they're not doing a very good job of whatever they're supposed to be doing. And this, in a way, kind of, does not resonate with your responses to the earlier statements, which said, well, things are fine, they could be better, but then, well, that's how things are.
Let me clarify here. I think it's not necessarily supplementable. It could be, but I think educational institutions are doing a decent job. Yes, but decent is not enough during those interesting times, right? And being decent um, prepares you for disruption, because that's a sentence, right? From good is the enemy of great. I think that was Phil Collins. I'm not 100% sure. And that's the issue, right? If you good this, you stop there because you're good enough. You don't go all the way to great. If you're bad, you need to change. You can go all the way up to great, but if you're good, you're basically just chilling there and waiting for a disruption, right? And we've seen that. If you look at corporations these days, the average lifespan of a corporation remaining in the S&P 500 index is 60 years in 1958. Sorry, was 60 years. Now it's down to around 15 years, right? So it's almost it's less than a third. And I just find this incredible, right? We're seeing this disruption. And honestly, I believe this can happen to educational institutions. It can happen quicker than you think. And I think that for most of the purposes of education, you don't need them anymore. But they still have a strong brand and they still have great facilities. I think if you are an ambitious individual these days, you can get fully prepared for your job without being at university for a second. Because you can watch YouTube videos, you can teach stuff yourself, you can hang out in online communities and basically just do what you need to do to study stuff. You, that was pretty much impossible a couple of years back. Institutions like Harvard and other universities, they had a monopoly on knowledge. That isn't true these days anymore. So I think that could potentially change. Do they still do a decent job in educating people? Yes, they do. But that doesn't mean they're the only ones being able to do this. And that leaves a big chance for disruption. And I could imagine what we're, for instance, seeing at Evo, right, that these micro learning things will take off at one point. What we're noticing is that so our learning system is a little bit different. We're asking people to prioritize differently every day based on what they know. And based on what their immediate task is, they either study something or not, right? And if they want to study something to do this task, they locate it on the learning map. So they decide every day differently. And what we notice is that people learn way quicker because they immediately know why what they're learning is important because they have a task in mind. And to be very honest, I could imagine everyone learning like this in the future. I think it is the more efficient way of doing things. And then professors and so on can help people, can come in for discussions, for online discussions to boost these kind of things. Do they need to be employed at a university? To be very honest, I don't think so. I think it could be. I think universities still do great other things like research. I consider going back to Cambridge because I love research and it's very interesting. It doesn't necessarily prepare me for being an entrepreneur, but it's a completely different field, right? And that's what I think we still need these institutions for, but it's a different story than merely educating people.
No, I hear you loud and clear, Daniel, because typically if you use Clayton Christensen's terminologies and talk about an incumbent and talk about a disruptor, it is important to understand, I mean, who is an incumbent and who is a disruptor. So what I hear you saying is the incumbent is your current educational institution in the form of a college, and it could be Harvard, it could be anything else. And the disruptor was an organization like EWA.
Yeah, I mean, that would be ideal, right? If
Yeah,
my institution would actually do the entire disruption. I think there's going to be many disruptors. We're being one of them. And the question then really is, like, will universities collaborate? And I think that's going to be the major decision to be made. And I think educational institutions can remain very relevant. For instance, right, using a tool that we're currently building that prepares people to find content quicker. You type in what you want people to learn, and it automatically finds the right educational resources. So you, as the educator, don't have to work on just regurgitating things you already know. You have a tool, a tech tool for that, and then you focus on working on the problems at hand with your students. And I think if universities move more into this level, into this way of doing things, yes, there will be disruption, but it will mostly blend together and be together. There could also be the other form of disruption where they just become redundant at one point. And I don't think that would be a beautiful scenario because a lot of disruption is never really beautiful, only for those disruptors, right?
Amit, your thoughts on this?
I think to recap maybe 3 or 4 massive trends around homeschooling, after schooling, and vocational learning moving to internet at scale is going to lead to big behemoth systems coming on their own. So imagine when Google was born, they set up the standards for search, right? When Amazon was born, they set up the standards for e-commerce, right? They were not the first players in the space, but they just grew to a certain scale. Now, that's what's going to happen to these industries. I think the big traditional education economy is probably not super scared in the longer term because they enable too many more things, which are not going to go away in the physical side of things. But if they really are progressive, I would like to see more and more blended learning beginning to happen, because the way you can use tech to personalize something, the way you can automate a lot of things which a student can learn and go to the next level no matter what stage, what subject, right? That's completely impossible with the physical classroom approach. And we need to just go away from the top 5% elite, whether it's schools, colleges, engineering, MBAs, and just look at the next, 50 to 60%. I'm not even talking about the bottom layer where I don't know how many centuries it'll take us for us to improve. But that's the opportunity for those guys to embrace all this tech enabled innovation, to do better blended, immersive, personalized experiences. And that's where the opportunities come from. And which is when I look at the topic like harnessing the untapped potential. In India, 94% of the graduates are not industry ready. It doesn't get bigger than, what is the untapped part. And now you have an opportunity in the next 18 to 24 months to seriously accelerate, because the world is super hungry for your tools to make that desired impact. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And therefore, continuing on the story of disruptions, um, Daniel, what do you think? Who will be the architects of this disruption? Amit has talked about the fact that there will be multiple players. Some of them will become very large and they will have a significant amount of impact on the entire system while it may take some time. But who are going to be the architects of this disruption? Do you see them coming in from a regular stream of education which they have received, or a regular stream of experiences which they have gone through during the early stages of the career? Or do you think they will be bred and grown separately?
Very good question. So yeah, first of all, I have to agree with Amit again on the 100 unicorns in Edtech. I love this. This is a very extreme statement for 2 to 3 years, but I think yes, a lot of disruption will happen. Um, I have to challenge you though, Amit, on your point on, do we need that physical space, that university? I am, I think that's where, that's what the architects do currently. And if you think about one of the biggest disruptors, one of the biggest architects, it's YouTube, right? They didn't even know they were doing this initially. When I still remember YouTube in the early days, it was all videos of funny cats and bloopers and all these sorts of things. And now you have videos, educational content on neural networks that is way better than anything you would see in a classroom, because the visualization techniques are just beyond on what you can draw on a flipboard. And I think the architects of this change will be mostly tech people. I think it will be mostly people who build systems that allow for massive scale, that allow people to do what they've currently done in a fully different manner. And it might be tools that don't even have an educational purpose initially, right? Why are we here today? Why are we now able to do virtual learning sessions and digital classrooms and everything? Because Zoom, because of YouTube, because of these innovations, right? And I think with these major innovations maturing, will the initial job of education, right, what we did in the Middle Ages, scaling education, will be fully possible. And we will probably, if we think into the future, 20 years from now, we will hopefully still meet physically. That could be, though, at our homes. It could be completely decentralized. And today we're meeting at my place. Tomorrow we're meeting at Amit's place, or maybe my neighbor, because Amit's place is too far away. But that could be completely decentralized. We don't need to pay for a large university space. We don't even need to pay for a library. All those books are online these days, right? We don't need that space. We can have it all at our places and host those classrooms. And that will all be tech enabled. And there might be a teacher being present virtually. There might be a teacher being present physically. And we will have access to all our homework digitally and do it ourselves and collaborate. And I can call Amit the next day if I have a question. about a problem I cannot solve. Um, and it will be super quick, and we can chat and solve problems together. And I think, yeah, that typical job a university did the last 500,000 years will be drastically different. It doesn't mean that the institution isn't participating in that, but I don't think we need in like 20 years from now that we need to go to some place physically where we need to get our education. I do though believe that we need to meet other people physically, because education is so much broader than just knowledge. It's interpersonal, it's about emotions, it's about emotional intelligence, and those things can only be emitted physically. So we will do need to continue those things, but they will look a little bit differently, and they will be a little bit more decentralized. That's at least my prediction.
So, is there any work which has been done which is correlating the efficacy of the education system with your ability to build an enterprise like what you and Amit have been doing?
Sorry, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so Amit, I mean, we're asking about the correlationship between doing well as far as the traditional education system is concerned and your ability to innovate and disrupt and create an enterprise like what you've done.
Sure. I think that's a very niche question because if I'm hearing you right and you're talking about entrepreneurship, uh, traditional school systems are not designed to promote innovation, creativity at all. I think they're trying to help the student grapple with the knowledge that's available because you build a curriculum in 1 year, you don't refresh it for a few years. In the meantime, I mean that's where the critique comes from, where there's so much of potential in edtech because that's what sort of gets behind your like look at NEP, right? In case of India, for some of you who are listening to this and are focused on India, we have done such a major intervention after decades. At one end, I'm like shocked to say that we took so long. Ideally, this should be moving every couple of years, if not faster. We figure out a more faster way to iterate this because the world is changing, the information available to the mankind is changing, and therefore our decision capabilities need to evolve commensurate with that. Uh, you know, and to me, what just does not make sense is why would people be slow when they can be faster already? So the tech exists, right? And it's just the right time for us to go out as entrepreneurs, wannabe entrepreneurs, to go out and make that statement now. I also wanted to pick on one of the previous threads that, in EdTech, what I have seen usually, I found like three-way partnership. Somebody who was a disgruntled student, right? So, for example, I come from a very middle class tier 4 town. That's where my roots are, in small villages in UP, right? That's a northern province in India. And a lot of my cousins actually dropped out of school and colleges because we did not have the right environment. I ended up going to one of the top colleges, etc., because of thanks to the cheerleading by my parents. Now, I look at it very differently, right? Um, and what you're forgetting is parents everywhere are very, very ambitious. So what amazes me is the sheer opportunity here. So one is a disgruntled student. When I looked around, okay, fine, I was able to make the education system work for me, but it wasn't working for 90% of my family, right? That's a big opportunity. Now, similarly, there's a disgruntled professor somewhere who's like, I want to change things, but the school would not allow me, the college would not allow me, the board does not allow me. And they come together, right? Powered by some crazy execution when it comes to that, then you're building true innovation. Now, some of these cases, I'll take an academic example, right? A professor right there in Roman, a crazy executor in the form of Gaurav, both crazy students, right? And they build it up, no less over here. And when you do it, you're just breaking the barrier on distance. So there's a story that I have that during COVID, what we figured out was we could already service our super users in Meghalaya. There's a parent and a child hungry there. They like Oki Perky and they love it so much that they're learning it because they could not find a good enough tutor in the neighborhood with or without COVID. Yeah. You go to this small town in Orissa, not Bhubaneswar, not Puri, not Cuttack, really small one called Jharsuguda. right? Here is a little girl, a genius. She goes on and gets featured on her school magazine already, where she's the youngest by far. Everybody else who's featured in that school magazine is at least thrice her age, right? And that's what I'm getting goosebumps when I'm like thinking of the story, because it really amazes me how easy it is to make that impact with a good enough product, right? And the world is really struggling right now, so why wouldn't you do that? And that's where I would like to sort of guide in, that if I was an entrepreneur or a entrepreneur listening to this, I would say just go out, make it large. This is your time.
Understood. Very interesting. I mean, the story which you recounted about the girl at Jasugoda, it's very, very inspiring. This is something which would just not be possible, 5 years back. Forget about 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Daniel, any thoughts on this?
a, a lot of thoughts, so many that I even had to write it down. Three points, and I try to be quick on those, because we don't want to go too far. But I think the first interesting part to this is really what we're seeing these days is a little bit different. We're seeing accelerated change, right? We are seeing the industrial revolution happened over 3 generations. The digital revolution happened within 1 generation. The AI revolution now is happening quicker than 1 generation, and people just need to adapt quicker. The jobs that people need to do in 10 years from now, they might not even exist yet. I mean, what is a full stack developer? What is a machine learning engineer? Tell that to someone 20 years ago, they couldn't tell you, right? And or at least an ordinary, human being that just considers going to university right now. Now everyone talks about these things. So I think we need to get way better in updating knowledge continuously. Um, Secondly, I think the role of experts is going to change because AI is making a lot of things possible that was only possible before by experts, especially also when it comes to medical decision making, for instance. And we still have a lot of regulation around this, and there's a lot of ethical components to all of this. But eventually, we can feed a machine a myriad of data, and at one point, it's going to make a decision that is probabilistically better than what a human would do it. In the long term, it's going to outperform the human, right? And that means we need to go back to jobs that are creative in nature, that require analogical thinking ability to create new things. And I think this will happen quicker than we expect. And that brings me to my last point. That's actually research I've done at Cambridge, and we looked at what determines people to be a successful entrepreneur. And there's been a multitude of parameters. And in the end, we wrote a random forest that predicts non-successful entrepreneurship correctly in 97.1% of all cases, right? So it's incredibly easy at one point to do this just based on a variety of cognitive factors. And if you look at three important ones, intelligence, creativity, and analogical thinking ability, what you would see is when someone is in the low intelligence area, they are 300% less likely to be a successful entrepreneur. It's just the very poor truth. And that doesn't mean I'm a genuine believer in you being able to change this. There's a couple of interesting experiments that show that you can, if you really believe, be plastic enough to change this. But it doesn't happen very often, unfortunately. But then afterwards, if you're at least in the mediocre part, intelligence doesn't play a role. It actually makes you a little bit less likely to be a successful entrepreneur later on. But creativity remains important. And analogical thinking ability, that's what we found, right? The ability to learn about one market, and just by learning about one market, transferring this to another market, what you will, if you're good at that, if you're good in analogical thinking, you're 500% more likely to be a successful entrepreneur. And school isn't really teaching us much about this.
Daniel,
right?
I'm
When
sorry.
I think,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for this, but I have been hammered. We have run out of. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mohit, for concluding the whole discussion. But I have to say, it was pretty interesting. There were some very interesting points that were raised here in this conversation, and high time. I mean, it's EdTech. Somebody in the earlier conversations had said it is the worst of the times, but it is also the best of the times. And I feel like that's what has happened, especially to the education sector, if not everywhere else. Keeping that hope and optimism together. Thank you again, you all gentlemen, for this amazing session. With that, we also bring day three at Audi 3 of TIE Global Summit 2020 at a closure. Thank you.